Good day, everybody. My name is Skender Daerti, and I am honored to be the host of the Value Analysis Expert Series. I never thought I would be allowed to come back after Terri Nelson assumed the position, but somehow she has relinquished her duties back to me temporarily. I feel like this seat is very hot, and I'm going to be getting out of it very soon. But either which way, I want to introduce our panelists. Of course, we have the esteemed Terri Nelson, who will be returning to this position sometime soon. Barbara Strain, who needs no introduction, and Jenell Robinson, who is also one of the most respected people in this industry. So with that, we're talking about value analysis, and we want to talk about the value analysis process. And so, ladies, I'm just going to come to you from a supplier standpoint. This may come as a surprise to you. You may be very shocked to hear this. But I would say somewhere between 99 and 100% of suppliers, when they hear value analysis, they try to run the other way. Okay? If you start to introduce a product to a clinician on the floor and you feel like the conversation is going well, you hope that there is some way, somehow, they're going to be able to say something. But as soon as they say, that's great, I love it, I can't wait to introduce this to value analysis, all of a sudden, it's basically like you have gone into the great abyss. There's a black hole, and I might as well kiss every thought I had of ensuring some sort of transaction in this week, month, year, whatever it may be, because we're not going to have it happen. So what we're going to talk about today is hopefully you guys can help dispel the rumors and help us understand, help the community understand what is the process, what is entailed in the process. And, you know, when we hear buzzwords like 30, 60, 90, is there any sort of reality to those things? Can they be met? Or obviously, what are the parameters that help that the supplier community can also do to help make the process easier on you? So help us understand what goes into the process. What are like the first couple steps? Terri, I already see you go and you're smiling. So go ahead, Terri, tell us.
I thought, and you knew they wouldn't last long. So I appreciate you calling on me. The first thing is, I just wanted to add to what you had said, and it will lean into this, is that's exactly what happens is the supplier is looking at the sales with the clinical, because they want to get to their clinical experts to identify what's going on. And the clinicians are also looking at it for the patient, but they're looking at it from their patient population. So product that is commoditized or clinically preferred and used a lot across multiple populations is not their first thought, the clinical staff. So nobody's being bad about it, but it is our first thought. Our first thought is always, in the process, it's the identification of the product need. I'll use that. So it's looking at that product that you're bringing in. How is it currently used, or a like product used across our organization? What are the populations involved? What's the length of stay? All kinds of factors regarding those patients are what we are thinking about. And that can be what starts to slow the process down. It's not deliberate, but at the end of the day, we don't want to spend all this time and not be able to bring a product in. I think that's sometimes what the supplier community forgets. If we're even looking at the product, putting some effort, we're going to give you feedback why we're not using it if that's the case. But 9 times out of 10, it really is to make it successful and address all these questions within the organization. And I know all three of us, as well as other colleagues, have criteria because they understand their organization and the healthcare that they're providing to their patient populations to ask those questions. So I try to be nice. I think they're fearful of me sometimes, Skender, because I do have this nonverbal face that goes, like that. And then
I sat across from you, Terri. You've intimidated me many times. I know.
You've seen that face.
I've seen that face. Barbara, what would you like to add to that?
So thanks, Terri, for bringing up it's that need, right? And whether we're working on using internal data to discover how far we are from specific needs, or someone is coming in and introducing, do we have this great product that I know you really should have here because of, and I've talked to Dr. So-and-so. So you set the stage really well. The next phase, we're really gathering, all that information, both what in the world are we currently doing today and why, and are we having issues meeting outcomes gaps or financial gaps or operational workforce, whatever it is for our patients to have the best outcome. But we're also gathering all the purchase history, any clinical data, cost per procedure, per patient day, or whatever that is, and collecting every bit of information, both from the supplier as well as internal from all of the key KOLs and SMEs and all those folks internally. So that's a really important step, and it could be a few days because it's a commodity item, doesn't cost very much, but it could take quite a long period of time because we're going to look for what's the reimbursement code, what's really happening and things. So there's just that whole sort of pile of spaghetti that we have to gather before that sauce and everything can be completed to have the meal. So anyway.
And Jenell, so let me just ask you then, Jenell, help the supplier community understand.
Mhm.
Is there a set schedule? Do you meet every month? Do you meet every week? Do you meet quarterly? And I know your value analysis, so you're probably sitting on multiple committees, but just thinking about one product category or within the OR. Okay, so maybe that's one value analysis team that's viewing that. Are they meeting monthly? Are they meeting quarterly? And tell us how does a meeting go from minute 1 to minute 30, 60, whatever it may be?
Sure. I think in order to answer that appropriately, you really have to kind of break it down and take a step back. So let's put a fork in the road. So we have the commodities, and then something maybe a little more complex like implants. Okay, so your commodity items are they tend to meet more frequently. But I think take a step back from that, and in order, before they even reaches that committee, that value analysis professional is taking a look at it, and it may not be apparent who all of the users are. So if we're going to switch to something, you want feedback from all of the users, right? So what the value analysis team will do is to actually take a deep dive, not just purchase history by like location, but then you have to break that down into sub locations. And have we gained this person's feedback? Is this person influential enough? Do they have a high enough volume to where we need to get their feedback? We need to get them on board, bring them on the team to see if they even want to switch to something. And then, so that all has to be vetted out before it even gets before that committee. So say all the I's are dotted, T's are crossed, we have no contractual obligations with the current vendor. So, okay, we're open, we're ripe, we can take a look at this and do an evaluation. So if it's a commodity type item, those committees tend to meet a little more frequently than the more complex, high dollar, newer technology type committees.
And so what is the gap there? Is that quarterly versus biannually?
Some bi-weekly, some monthly, some bi-weekly, some monthly. It just kind of depends, I think, on how each organization is structured. So I've seen both. The commodities, I would say at least monthly. Some bi-weekly, depending on what's on the agenda and how big the organization is, to be honest with you. Some things don't require committee. Some things you can do, behind the scenes. There's a lot of different avenues, I think, that this conversation can go depending on what it is in question.
And the organization, don't you think it's the organization too? And listen, because if you have multiple locations, as the organization I worked for had, but those locations, sometimes I think there's an anticipation that those locations will all use the product. And your example, I think, is perfect to say, if we limit certain implants to this facility because they have the expertise and what have you, just as I think a lot of organizations do. So it goes back to, we're vetting all that out too.
Right.
You found people, I found campuses that are using a product like, whoever let you use that because you shouldn't be using it, right? So to kind of clean some of that up.
You definitely have to exercise change theory management. And that is from the get-go, from the time you are first introduced, that product is first introduced. You know, you have your naysayers, you have your followers, you have your early adopters, and you need to kind of get all the ducks in a row before you move on to that next step on and identify where everyone sits on that continuum before you even take it to a committee. So that takes time. So you asked about, the 30, 60, 90 day. That alone, depending on how many locations you're talking about and how many clinicians you're talking about, that alone could take 60 to 90 days. It just really depends. But then, I think on the other end of the spectrum, you have something that is probably pretty benign, maybe a high volume commodity type item that it touches almost every patient. Some of those you can whip through pretty quickly. And you can find out very quickly where everyone sits on the change management continuum, and target the people and try to get them on your team. And you can maybe crank that out in a 30-day period.
So,
well, it's interesting you should say change management, because it could be that there's so many things going on in the organization, whether it's a new computer or you just can't inundate people with change all the time because they get very tired. It's a syndrome. And so you have to be cognizant of those sorts of things at all times.
If it's one thing nurses and physicians aren't totally on board with 100% of the time is change.
Because I always think about that early on when I started, I would get so many people angry with me, like, I'm a nice person, you get angry at me? But it was because, in talking to them, it was not just change, but the impact to the patient. Yeah. I know this that I've done, and Jenell, you and I've done it before on the clinical, it always works for the patient. Now you want me to change it, and anything that could potentially negatively impact my patient is a concern to me. And that's the other part of we do. We keep it all focused. Value analysis very much keeps it focused on that patient and who is that patient.
And I think along with that, Terri, is the why. Why are we changing this? Why are we going to take something that is tried and true? Is it worth saving a couple dollars to potentially change those outcomes? And so all of that has to be weighed. It has to be weighed with clinical literature. What's the literature that's out there? What is the literature that's showing? And if it's something that really does have a potential to move that outcome needle, now before we even get to that discussion on the committees to change or to get them on board to say, hey, we want to switch to this, let's evaluate it. So let's insert a step for evaluation in that 30, 60, 90 day window. Some evaluations cost, some don't. And so that's a whole other paradigm that needs to be discussed, and who has the authority to approve that and at what threshold. So does it fall under a particular threshold where a specific subcommittee can look at it, say, yes, we agree that these outcomes may be improved. It meets our dollar threshold. So yes, we can go ahead and approve it. So those evaluations can clip along at a pretty decent pace. If it's above, if you're talking about a $25,000, $30,000 implant of some sort or implant system of some sort, that requires a higher authority. Now those committees meet once a month. But there's only so much time on that agenda. So you may not make that next month. You may make 2-3 months down the line, because that's one committee making decisions for tens of thousands of patients.
Yeah.
And almost 10,000 doctors, or 5,000 to 10,000 doctors that all want something different. So everything goes into a queue. So I think I wish there was an easy answer. Oh, it takes this, but it really doesn't. And this is why it depends. And I think it's important for suppliers to really understand what goes behind some of the decision making before it even gets to an evaluation point. Because patience, maybe it'll help garnish some patience before we start, skipping and looking for another clinician that maybe has a louder voice, because it won't get there any faster.
Well, and I think you hit the nail on the head. I don't think suppliers always run away from value analysis because of the fear of the process. It's the fear of the deprioritization, reprioritization syndrome that I was told by somebody, hey, we meet on July 18th as a committee. I'm going to bring this to July 18th. And then you find out we didn't make it to this calendar. And then next thing you know, you find out you're not even going to get talked about till November's meeting, and that's part of the challenge from the supplier perspective of, if they're not even going to talk about me till November, I'm probably not even going to make a real agenda or have an opportunity to get an evaluation until June of 2026, right? That's where I think most of the concern comes in. So is there a way that the supplier community can help align better? Is there a way that we can at least get better expectations set so that, we don't get told, hey, July 18, and all hopes are up, and now the local rep has gone and told their manager, hey, guess what? We're meeting with UCLA value analysis on July 18th. This is going to be fantastic. And, that ship has sailed already.
So one of the things I think that's really important here, and I think we talk about it almost every time, but if the company has provided the right value proposition and all of the information that that organization is requiring in order to make an informed decision, if they've got those ducks in a row, if they understand about their product and how it may or may not fit into the organization or not, that helps with the schedule, because then you won't be surprised later on when you get into committee when one or two people say, well, what about this, about the product? And then silence, because it wasn't something that you were told about, or it's a surprise, and now you've got to go back and do more information. So answer all the questions accurately, get all the material together. If you're using, say, a third-party tool by the provider and they're asking you all these questions, don't just skip them and say, yes, we can do that. Provide what is needed, and so they can really understand who else they might need to bring in, or what information internally they might have to gather.
Yeah, I think it's important to, and I know the three of us we have policies about timing of review and the type of review, certain things that do have to go to committee and certain things that do not have to go to committee. And then depending on where you are, you can also do things via emails, highly commoditized products that we just want to keep moving along. That's what a lot of people do. So I think it's important for the supplier community to know that we just don't say, oh, we missed it. We try to really put them, and Skender, you said that, we try to prioritize them as makes sense for the level of review that they need to have, because that helps us to use, as both of you had said, the right clinical experts to make that all happen. I do want to add just two other things in the process that we talked about that we think is really important for suppliers, and it's the implementation and compliance. So that's the other part Jenell is talking about. We do all this review. We have not even, once we get approval, we have to implement. And depending on the inventory we currently hold or commitment with the distributor, that's going to delay that. So implementation is, and every supplier wants to help us with implementation. It's like, sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, but that's really important. And then it's compliance. You got to give us time enough to get your product in and use it so that we've got some type of usage information that we can say, hey, we're doing it or not doing it. So those are also important. That takes time.
Yeah. So coming back to the scheduling and the agenda, I assume that because again, you're saying you're meeting on almost a preset frequency basis, right, Jenell? Just going back to it. And I assume that, you have some sort of preset agenda, something that aligns with contract schedules already, some other things based on priority, et cetera, et cetera. But then I assume at some sort of rapid frequency, you always have somebody bring up a new product, whether it was they went to a trade show and got a hankering for something, or a sales rep snuck through the ranks and really got something, a hot button item. How does that get balanced out against already the preset schedule that's already there, Jenell?
I think in some organizations it can be handled through different committees, through a little different pathways that'll eventually merge into one. If they see the latest and greatest at a trade show, say, and they want to evaluate it, there may be a process for evaluation versus like addition to the formulary, which is the permanent set in stone. We're bringing this in, we're taking one out, we're, moving things around. So the best advice I can have to suppliers is to really understand your customer and your customer's processes, and they will help you to define the best path forward.
Barbara, what do you have to add to that?
So if something all of a sudden comes up that we've not heard about and or anything before, we'll say, that's great. So put it in the system, whatever, way it is, and we'll go through, our first review process, and then we'll let you know if it's going to make it onto the next schedule or whatever. But we don't have a big discussion about something that has just come up that somebody says, I just got back from whatever meeting and I want to do this. And we said, we got the process for that. Let us help you get it through that process so we can put it in the queue and we'll get there. And then we move on with the agenda. I sit in on value analysis meetings today if I've got clients or whatever, and I don't hear that much at all anymore, that, I want to talk about something. The only thing that they might want to talk about is, hey, I had an issue with something we approved and implemented, and it just happened this morning. Is anyone else having a issue with it or something? That might be something we discuss, but usually people just don't let things just drop in.
Mm-mm. No, and I think it's because, initiatives, circling back to what we talked about when we first started this discussion, is that there's a process for everything, and everything has been vetted. So once the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, and the bow is nice and neat on the top of the box, that's when it gets presented forward. So to throw something in without any of that context it's just not going to be discussed, because the building blocks aren't there. The decision making, elements are not there. And so the best thing is to, as Barbara said, submit it. It'll go into queue. We'll do the judicious workup on it, and we'll let you know moving forward.
Yeah, we would always, so internally when staff come back, they do look at that. They do put in requests to say, hey, I think this is really good. If it's in a product category that always, a contracting category that already exists, then we say, can you wait till this contract? And if it's a year out, it could be a year or more out. Can you wait till this contract? Or the other question that's always asked is, there a regulatory or best practice that has changed that this product will answer? Then it comes up higher in the queue. If it's something, it's the same stuff, they've got a few more widgets, but we can wait to that. But if they are changes in regulatory, it's not just, I say regulatory, but I also want to put in there best practice, especially if you work for an organization that does a lot of research, or you have providers that have done that. Now they're bringing in things that will generate best practice. You don't want to wait 2 years to do that. You want to bring that into the practice sooner. So you need to look at that time as well. So it works both ways, educating both the suppliers. I know we spend a lot of time talking about the suppliers, but we have to also, the providers have to understand there is a system, because at the end of the day, my mom's got to pay for something, and I want to make sure it's covered and she's getting the best value.
So two things two things that influence this, and we haven't talked about it yet, is there is the maturity of the value analysis program. So three of us come from a pretty mature programs, but there are people that are just getting into value analysis, or their organizations have just decided to like rekindle value analysis or whatever. So the supplier should understand that too, because those processes are not exactly as we're talking about today. So you really need to know before you go exactly what's happening there. And we use the term compliance about contracts and things, but there's also compliance both internally in your organization and then externally from the suppliers to your processes. So that you don't want erosion of compliance within your organizations either. And that's what the sort of the job of leadership is, to help to keep those as strategic initiatives and things. But I think those are two important factors that you have to kind of put in there as well.
So here's a question. How does local level, hospital level value analysis, which in some of the bigger institutions, we've got local hospital level value analysis, and then we have system level value analysis. How do they combine? How do they synergize? Where do they differ? Are there opportunities where the suppliers are gaining favorability at the local level and nothing at the system level, or vice versa? System level says yes, local level says not in my house.
Yeah, I think Barbara actually kind of introduced that too, because a different value analysis structures that are initiated. And I worked for a large multi-system organization, and we evolved to a system value analysis. So we had representatives from all of the hospitals or the hospital regions that they were part of and provided care. We did it by a system, right? So we try to make that sure. But you are absolutely correct. We get something in that we look at purchase history, and it's like, why is little ABC community ordering these products? They shouldn't be, but a rapid dropped off. The doctor thought it was really good, blah, blah, blah. When a representative, this is a secret, I'm going to share it right now. When a sales provider comes in and says, ABC facility's been using our product for 4 or 5 years and they just love it, I said, thank you for letting me know, because they have been non-compliant now. And I'm going to look at that product and figure out why they're doing that, right? So that and I said, I don't take this the wrong way. We still may look at your product, but here's the reality. There's a whole nother contract that we have a certain commitment level. We're all familiar with them. And just as if it was your product, you want us to honor that commitment, they have to honor it as well. So that's another part of our role. I know suppliers are less likely to tell us, they're less likely to tell me, but it's always in the back of my mind.
So ladies, we're arriving at the end of our time here, and we tried to boil an ocean on this huge topic of value analysis process and try to get it within a soluble 30 minutes, which is impossible. Hence why this is called a series and not a show. So with that, I guess in respect to kind of the topics that we talked about today regarding process, which there is so much more that we didn't get a chance to talk to, what are some of the key takeaways you want the audience to take away from today? So Jenell, let's start with you.
I think one of my key takeaways would be patience and understanding. I think that there's a fine line. So early planning is your friend. If there's a new technology, something that's coming out, early planning and discussions will help open that door and define the appropriate pathway that the initiative should go down. I think there is a fine line between those early discussions and waiting till you get market penetration, and then also coinciding with, and this may be a completely, other podcast, but also coinciding with reimbursement schedules and rulings and when they take effect. And so all of these things need to be juggled appropriately. So, it never hurts to have those early discussions and help that value analysis professional guide you as to when is the right time. And that may hopefully help ease some of the some of the discontent later if it takes a little bit longer.
Mhm.
Great. Barbara?
So I wrote down a little quote that I think is apropos at this point is know before you go. So I've said it for years and years and years is understand each of your different organizations and how their policy works. What is their sort of process? What's their, maturity? Are they even ready for your product, etc.? But then I always add, the sales team kind of goes, oh my God, she's going to mention the CRM and now I'm going to have to put stuff in or whatever. But these are key things that you can put in your CRM so that you understand and have at your fingertips. So no matter who's covering your territory or if it gets switched around or whatever, you'll know the characteristics of these organizations before you go.
Great. And I'll add to your quote from my favorite field general, knowing is half the battle. That's G.I. Joe.
Whole vision popped up in my head again.
Yeah.
Another vision about in my head.
Terry, cap it off.
Yeah. So everything that Barbara and Jenell said, I underline, underscore, do that. One of the things I'd like suppliers to take away is we do this for you, and you need to help us. So I don't want to get to the package all bundled up and then realize that you had a manufacturing disruption and that you have had inventory that didn't pass some kind of quality measure or what have you. That's part of this whole plan as well. You need to share that with the provider side and the value analysis and not be fearful of it. So as we talk, we can outline this all, we can do all of this, and then I get that call, and we all have gotten it where it said, oh yeah, I gave you the product we're going to implement, but it's not ready now.
Mm-hmm.
That disrupts our plans, but it also it's a bad look for you. You now become, and it's not value analysis saying this, it's the other part. When they say they get a supplier feels like they get a bad rap, it's not 9 times out of 10, it's not from value analysis, it's from the clinical staff. Because they do talk to one another outside their organization. So yeah, we wanted to use that product. And can you believe it? We went through all this and they didn't have it available. I'll never work with that company again. So that's the other part of it. We really need, and it goes into relationships. I know we'll hopefully have a future to talk about that, but we're working together. All about partners. Being partners with each other, not in a strategic plan.
Can I dovetail onto something Terry had mentioned? I think along with that is when suppliers know, oh, by the way, and then we find out we get the bow all tied up on that package. And, oh, by the way, there's a version 2 coming out in 6 months. That doesn't sit well. And if we would have known ahead of time, we could plan for that. Either wait until version 2 comes out or challenge what's wrong with version 1. What's happening, were there ergonomics or what was happening? So just that open communication on different iterations of products and as they come out and anticipated timelines helps tremendously.
Yeah. All those things just make our checklist longer.
So basically be forthright
Yeah.
and be prepared is what I'm hearing in summation.
Were you a Boy Scout?
I would never pass that. So with that, ladies, thank you very much for imparting your knowledge continuously for the entire community. This is obviously goes well beyond the supplier community. This is equally, hopefully, as beneficial for the value analysis and the clinical community to hear the entire process, what goes in, and the expectations. Obviously, a lot more to talk about. Thank you so much for sharing. I do want to provide the audience with a little bit of an insight. On August 15th at 11 a.m., we will be hosting our first Value Analysis Expert Series webinar, which we're very excited. And we're going to be going through a forest view all the way down to a tree, maybe even look at some bark perspective of value analysis. So please tune in August 15th, 11 a.m., see these beautiful faces. And have an opportunity, and we'll be asking some poll questions, etc., during the discussion. So it'll be a great opportunity to chat live with the experts and have your thoughts listened to and hopefully questions answered. So, ladies, thank you very much. To all the audience, thank you for giving us your time, and we appreciate it. Look forward to seeing everybody on another episode very shortly. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.